My family abandoned me and left me alone, but after I got back on my feet, they asked me for help and want me back. My name is Karen, and I need to tell you something that happened when I was 17. Something that changed everything about who I thought I was and what family meant. I remember that Tuesday in October like it was yesterday. I'd just finished my shift at the local coffee shop where I worked part-time after school. My backpack was heavy with textbooks, and I was already mentally preparing for the chemistry test I had the next day. The autumn air was crisp, and I could smell wood smoke from someone's fireplace as I walked up our street. Our house looked different somehow as I approached. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but something felt off. The curtains were drawn tight, which was unusual because Mom always liked natural light. The porch light wasn't on either, even though it was getting dark. I fumbled with my keys at the front door, juggling my backpack and the leftover pastries I'd brought home from work. When I finally got inside, the silence hit me like a physical blow. Not the comfortable quiet of an empty house, but something heavier, something final. Mom? Dad? Alex? I called out, dropping my bag by the door. No answer. The echo of my own voice seemed to mock me. That's when I noticed the furniture was gone. Not all of it, but the important pieces. The family photos that usually lined the hallway table had vanished. Mom's favorite armchair wasn't in its usual spot by the window. The coffee table where we played board games on Sunday nights was missing. My heart started racing as I ran through the house, checking every room. My parents' bedroom was completely empty. My brother Alex's room looked like it had been cleaned out in a hurry. His posters were torn down, leaving tape marks on the walls, and his closet doors hung open, revealing nothing but empty hangers. But my room was untouched. Everything exactly as I'd left it that morning. My bed was still unmade, my homework scattered across my desk, my clothes in a pile on the chair where I'd thrown them the night before. In the kitchen, I found it. A single piece of paper on the counter, folded in half with my name written on the outside in my mother's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Karen, you're old enough now to take care of yourself. We've moved somewhere smaller and can't take you with us. You'll figure it out, you always do. The rent is paid through the end of the month. After that, you're on your own. Don't try to find us. That was it. 17 years of what I thought was love, reduced to 4 sentences. No explanation, no goodbye, no forwarding address. Just, you'll figure it out. Like I was a math problem they'd grown tired of solving. I read that note probably 50 times that first night, sitting on the kitchen floor, hoping I'd misunderstood something, hoping it was some kind of cruel joke. But their absence spoke louder than any words could. The house felt enormous and suffocating at the same time. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump, expecting to hear familiar voices that would never come home again. I called my parents' cell phones until the numbers were disconnected. I tried Alex's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. A generic recording, not his voice. They had erased me from their lives as methodically as they had packed their belongings. As I sat there in that empty house, something inside me shifted. The scared 17-year-old girl who had walked through that door expecting dinner and help with homework was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who understood that the world was far crueler than she'd ever imagined. I had exactly 3 weeks before I'd be homeless. 3 weeks to figure out how to survive in a world that had just taught me the most brutal lesson of all. That even the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally can abandon you without looking back. That night I didn't cry. I couldn't. The shock was too deep, the betrayal too complete. Instead, I sat in that kitchen until sunrise, staring at that note and planning my next move. Because if there's one thing I learned in that moment, it's that when everyone abandons you, the only person you can count on is yourself. The first week was the hardest. I kept going to school like nothing had happened, partly because I didn't know what else to do, and partly because school was the only normal thing left in my life. I'd come home to that increasingly empty house and try to do homework by the light of the single lamp they'd left behind. When the electricity got cut off on day 8, reality hit me like a sledgehammer. I had about $60 in my savings account, and whatever cash I could scrape together from my coffee shop job. It wasn't enough for a deposit on even the cheapest apartment in town. That's when I discovered the storage units behind Miller's Hardware. The owner, an elderly man named Frank, had a section of older units that weren't climate-controlled. They were cheaper to rent, and he didn't ask too many questions when I paid cash for a month up front. Unit 47 became my bedroom. It was 8 feet by 10 feet of concrete walls and a corrugated metal door. I bought a sleeping bag from the thrift store and learned to arrange cardboard boxes as furniture. It wasn't home, but it was shelter, and it was mine. The hardest part was staying clean. I couldn't afford a gym membership, so I got creative. The community center downtown had public restrooms with sinks, And if I timed it right during their busy hours, I could wash my hair and brush my teeth without anyone noticing. I bought baby wipes in bulk and learned to give myself what I called truck stop showers in bathroom stalls. Food was an even bigger challenge. I'd always taken for granted that there would be something in the refrigerator when I got hungry. Now, every meal required strategy. I survived mostly on peanut butter sandwiches, bananas, and whatever day-old pastries I could bring home from the coffee shop. My manager, Katie, started accidentally making extra sandwiches that needed to be thrown away, which somehow always ended up in a bag with my name on it. The worst part wasn't the discomfort or the hunger. It was the invisibility. People walked past my storage unit every day, completely unaware that a 17-year-old girl was living inside. Teachers at school asked if I was feeling okay because I looked tired. But when I said I was fine, they believed me because it was easier than digging deeper. I became an expert at looking normal. I kept my school clothes in my locker and changed in the bathroom every morning. I volunteered to help with after-school activities just to have somewhere warm to be. I studied in the library until closing time, not because I was particularly studious, but because it delayed the moment when I'd have to return to that concrete box. One night, about 2 weeks into my new reality, I was lying on that thin sleeping bag, listening to the rain hammer against the metal door, when something inside me broke open. Not in a bad way, but like a shell cracking to let something new emerge. I realized that I was surviving. More than that, I was adapting. I started making lists in a notebook I'd found in my locker. Things I needed. Things I wanted to accomplish. Places where I could shower for free. Restaurants that threw away good food at closing time. I mapped out every public bathroom in a 5-mile radius, rating them by cleanliness and privacy. Most importantly, I started paying attention to how other people managed to thrive when they had so little. I watched the homeless man who always seemed to have clean clothes and 3 meals a day, and learned he volunteered at the church kitchen in exchange for food and laundry privileges. I observed the single mothers at the community center who juggled school, work, and kids, and noted how they shared resources and information. After 3 weeks in that storage unit, I felt like I'd earned a master's degree in survival. I knew which gas stations had the cleanest bathrooms, which restaurants were most likely to hire someone underage, and which social services would help without asking too many questions about where I lived. The funny thing was, I started to feel proud of myself. Not proud of the situation, but proud of how I was handling it. Every morning that I woke up in that metal box, got dressed, and walked into school looking like any other teenager was a small victory. Every night I managed to find enough food to keep going was proof that I was stronger than anyone had given me credit for. I was learning something my parents had never taught me, that dignity doesn't come from where you sleep or what you eat. It comes from refusing to let circumstances destroy your sense of self. And despite everything they'd taken from me, they couldn't take that. After living in that storage unit for a month, I knew I needed something more stable. The night shifts at Riverside Diner became available when their regular cook quit without notice, and I convinced the owner, Maria Santos, to give me a chance despite being 17. "You sure you can handle this, kid?" Maria asked, looking me up and down skeptically. "Night shift means 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 4 nights a week. It's not glamorous work." I almost laughed. Glamorous was the last thing I was worried about. "I can handle it," I told her. And I meant every word. The work was exactly what I needed. While other teenagers were sleeping in warm beds, I was flipping burgers, washing dishes, and cleaning tables for truckers, night shift workers, and the occasional drunk college student. The pay was minimum wage, but Maria let me eat 1 meal per shift, which solved my biggest problem. More importantly, the diner was warm, well-lit, and had clean bathrooms. I could do homework during slow periods, and Maria didn't mind if I used the employee shower in the back after my shift ended. She never asked why I needed to shower at work, and I never offered to explain. The other night shift workers became my unlikely family. There was Roberto, a guy in his 30s who worked construction during the day and sent money to his family in Mexico. Carmen, a nursing student who needed the flexible schedule. And Big Jim, a former trucker who told stories that could make you laugh until your sides hurt. They all had their reasons for working nights, and none of them asked too many questions about mine. When I mentioned I was between apartments, Carmen offered to let me crash on her couch, but I politely declined. I'd learned that accepting help always came with strings attached, even from well-meaning people. What I did accept was their knowledge. Roberto taught me how to negotiate with landlords and utility companies. Carmen showed me which community college courses I could take for almost nothing. Big Jim explained how to build credit from scratch and why having documentation of everything was crucial. "Life's gonna try to knock you down, Karen," Big Jim told me one quiet Tuesday night as we cleaned the grill. The difference between people who make it and people who don't isn't where they start. It's whether they get back up smarter than when they fell. I was getting smarter. Every shift taught me something new about business, about people, about how money flowed through the world. I watched Maria manage inventory, handle difficult customers, and balance the books. I paid attention to which menu items had the highest profit margins and which suppliers gave her the best deals. During my breaks, I'd study not just for school, but for life. I read books about personal finance from the library, researched different career paths, and started making plans that extended beyond just surviving each day. I opened a bank account with my first paycheck and started saving every penny I could. The storage unit began to feel less like a desperate measure and more like a strategic choice. I wasn't paying rent to a landlord who could evict me on a whim. I wasn't dealing with roommates or nosy neighbors. It was mine, and I controlled every aspect of my small space. I bought a small battery-powered lantern and some plastic storage containers to organize my belongings. I found a folding table at a yard sale that I could use as a desk. Slowly, methodically, I was building something that belonged to me. School became easier to navigate once I had a steady income and regular meals. My grades, which had dipped during those first chaotic weeks, began to improve. Teachers started noticing me again, but for the right reasons this time. When my guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, called me into her office to discuss college applications, I was ready. "Karen, your grades have really turned around this semester," she said, looking at my transcript. "Have you thought about your plans after graduation?" "Every day," I replied. And I had. While my classmates worried about prom themes and weekend parties, I was calculating the cost of community college tuition and researching which degrees offered the best return on investment. I'd learned something my parents never taught me, that work wasn't a punishment or a burden. It was freedom. Every hour I spent at that diner was an hour I spent building my independence, my skills, and my future. Every dollar I earned was proof that I didn't need anyone to take care of me. The 17-year-old girl who had found that cruel note 6 months earlier was gone. In her place was someone who understood that respect isn't given freely. It's earned through consistency, reliability, and results. And I was earning mine, one night shift at a time. 12 years later, I was standing in the penthouse office of my third successful business, looking out at the city skyline, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Karen, there's a Forbes reporter here for your interview," she said. I'd built my empire systematically, the same way I'd survived in that storage unit, one careful step at a time. After graduating high school, I'd used my savings to enroll in community college business courses while continuing to work nights. I studied every successful entrepreneur I could find, analyzing their strategies and mistakes. My first business was simple, a cleaning service for office buildings. I knew how to work hard, how to be reliable, and how to stay invisible when necessary. I started with one small building, working before dawn while studying for classes. Within 6 months, I had 3 employees and 5 contracts. I sold that business 2 years later for enough profit to start my second venture, a logistics company that helped small restaurants streamline their supply chains. I understood food service from my diner days, and I'd learned to spot inefficiencies others missed. That business grew from my studio apartment to a warehouse to 3 locations across 2 states. By age 29, I'd sold the logistics company and launched my current enterprise, a consulting firm that helped overlooked entrepreneurs access capital and resources. We specialized in people like I'd been, those who didn't have family money or connections, but had vision and determination. The Forbes article called me the self-made millionaire who started with nothing. They wanted to know my secret, my inspiration, my family support system. I gave them the sanitized version: challenging childhood, learned independence early, turned obstacles into opportunities. I never mentioned the storage unit or the note that changed everything. Some stories are too raw for public consumption. But success, I discovered, tastes different when you've earned it completely alone. Every milestone felt simultaneously like a victory and a reminder of what was missing. When I bought my first house, there was no one to call with the news. When my company won its first major award, I sat in the ceremony audience surrounded by entrepreneurs celebrating with their families, and I felt the absence like a physical ache. I'd built something impressive, something valuable, something entirely mine. I had a beautiful home, financial security, and professional respect. I employed 43 people and had helped launch hundreds of small businesses. I should have felt proud, fulfilled, complete. Instead, I felt hollow. Success achieved in isolation has a strange quality. It's both more meaningful and less satisfying than it should be. Every achievement was proof of my capability, but also evidence of how much I'd had to overcome, that others took for granted. I'd learned to compartmentalize the loneliness. I dated occasionally, but relationships felt complicated when your origin story involved being abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love you unconditionally. I had colleagues I respected and employees I cared about, but maintaining professional boundaries meant never getting too close. The Forbes photographer wanted shots of me in my office, my home, my car. They wanted to capture the lifestyle of success, but they couldn't photograph what was really different about my success. The fact that I'd built it entirely for myself, with no one to share it with, no one who remembered where I'd started. Late that night, after the interview was finished, I sat in my home office looking at the financial statements that proved my worth on paper. 7 figures in the bank, property in 3 states, a business valued at more than most people would see in several lifetimes. I thought about that 17-year-old girl in the storage unit, making lists by battery-powered lantern light. She would be amazed by how far we'd come. She would be proud of what we'd accomplished. But I also wondered what she would think about how quiet this success was, how solitary. In all her planning and dreaming, she'd focused on building security and independence. She'd never considered what it would feel like to achieve everything you'd hoped for, with no one around to witness it or celebrate it with you. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become extraordinarily successful at taking care of myself because I'd had no choice. But that same self-reliance that had saved me had also isolated me. I was living proof that you could survive anything and thrive beyond your wildest dreams. I just hadn't expected success to feel so much like being in that storage unit all over again. Safe, secure, but fundamentally alone. The Facebook message arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 12 years to the day since I'd found that note in the kitchen. I'd been reviewing quarterly reports when my personal phone buzzed with a notification from someone named Alex Mitchell. The profile picture made my stomach drop. It was my brother, older and broader than the 18-year-old I remembered, but unmistakably Alex. The message was brief. Karen, I know this is unexpected, but I saw your interview in Forbes. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I'd really like to talk. I know we have a lot to discuss about what happened when we were younger. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I stared at that message for 20 minutes. My coffee growing cold as my hands shook. 12 years of silence. And now, suddenly, after I'd been featured in a national business magazine, my brother wanted to reconnect. The timing wasn't coincidental. The Forbes article had generated significant media attention. I'd been invited to speak at conferences, other publications wanted interviews, and my consulting firm had received dozens of new client inquiries. My success was now public knowledge, complete with photos of my home and estimates of my net worth. I showed the message to my business partner, David, the one person who knew the full story of my past. What do you want to do? He asked carefully. I want to know what they want, I replied. Because after 12 years of nothing, they don't suddenly miss my sparkling personality. I agreed to meet Alex at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown that I chose specifically because it was public, well-lit, and far from anywhere that held memories. I arrived 15 minutes early and positioned myself at a table with a clear view of the entrance. Alex walked in exactly on time, and my first thought was how much he looked like our father. Same jawline, same way of scanning a room before committing to entering it fully. He'd put on weight, and his hairline had receded, but he carried himself with a confidence I didn't remember from our teenage years. Karen, he said, approaching my table with a smile that seemed rehearsed. You look amazing. Success suits you. I didn't stand up or offer a hug. Alex, you look... I paused, studying his face. Older. He laughed nervously and sat down across from me. 12 years will do that. I can't believe how well you've done for yourself. That Forbes article was incredible. There it was. The reference to my public success within the first minute of conversation. I leaned back in my chair and waited for him to continue. I've thought about reaching out so many times over the years, he said, fidgeting with his coffee cup. But I never knew what to say. We were all so young when everything happened. You were 21, Alex. Hardly a child. His face flushed slightly. You're right. I should have. Things were complicated. You have to understand. Mom and Dad were going through a really rough time financially. The house was in foreclosure. Dad had lost his job, and they felt like they had no choice. I studied his expression as he spoke. He'd prepared this explanation, practiced it. But there were cracks in his composure, the way his eyes darted away when he mentioned our parents, the slight tremor in his voice when he said, no choice. So they had no choice but to abandon their 17-year-old daughter, I asked quietly. It wasn't like that. We thought you'd be okay. You were always so independent, so capable. Even as a kid, you figured things out. The absurdity of his justification almost made me laugh. So I was abandoned because I was competent? Karen, please. I know it sounds terrible now, but we were desperate. And look how well you turned out. Maybe it was meant to happen this way. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This was what he'd come to say. That my abandonment had been a favor. That my success justified their cruelty. That I should be grateful for the character-building experience of homelessness at 17. Why now, Alex? I asked directly. Why reach out now after 12 years of silence? He shifted uncomfortably. I've been going through some changes. Divorce, job situation, you know. It made me realize how important family is. How much I've missed having you in my life. There it was. The truth hiding behind the sentiment. He was having financial problems and remembered that his successful sister might be useful. I stood up from the table. I'm going to think about what you've said, Alex. This is a lot to process. Of course, he said quickly, also standing. Can I give you my number? Maybe we could have dinner next week, somewhere nice. My treat. His treat. With what money, I wondered, if he was going through a job situation. I took his business card, noticed it was slightly worn at the edges, and promised to call him soon. As I walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger or hurt, but a clinical curiosity about what exactly my family thought they could gain from me now. That evening, I hired a private investigator. I wanted to know everything about their lives over the past 12 years, their current financial situations, and most importantly, what had triggered this sudden desire for reconciliation. Knowledge, I'd learned, was the most valuable currency in any negotiation. And this reunion was definitely going to be a negotiation. The investigator's report arrived 3 days later, and it painted a clearer picture of my family's motivations than Alex's coffee shop performance had. Alex was indeed going through a divorce, his second one, and had been unemployed for 8 months. He'd burned through his 401k and was facing foreclosure on his house. My parents were in even worse shape. Dad had been forced into early retirement due to health issues, and Mom was working part-time at a retail store. They'd refinanced their house twice and were drowning in credit card debt. Most interesting was the timeline. Alex had reached out to me exactly 1 week after the Forbes article was published online, and 2 days after my parents had called him asking if he'd seen it. I called Alex back and suggested we have that dinner he'd mentioned. I chose an upscale steakhouse, partly to see how he'd react to the prices, and partly because I wanted him uncomfortable. Alex arrived wearing a suit that had seen better days and spent the first 10 minutes talking about how nice the restaurant was, in a way that made it clear he couldn't afford it. He ordered the cheapest entree on the menu and declined drinks, claiming he was trying to be healthier. I let him maintain the pretense through appetizers and small talk about his kids, his ex-wife, the challenges of the job market. He was working up to something, and I wanted to hear him say it himself. Karen, he finally began as our main courses arrived, I need to be honest with you about something. Part of why I wanted to reconnect is because I'm going through a really tough time financially. I cut a piece of my steak and waited. I know this is awkward, but I was wondering if you might be able to help me out temporarily, just until I get back on my feet. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. How much? I asked calmly. His eyes lit up with hope. Well, I'm behind on my mortgage by about $8,000, and if I could just catch up, I could probably refinance and lower my payments. It would make all the difference. $8,000. To him, it was salvation. To me, it was less than I spent on business lunches in a quarter. But it wasn't about the money. Alex, can I ask you something? Do you remember what you told me when I was 17 and needed help? His face flushed. Karen, that was different. I was just a kid myself, and you told me I'd figure it out because I always did. You watched our parents abandon me and said nothing. You packed up your room and left without even saying goodbye. I was 21 and broke. I didn't have a choice. You had choices. You could have taken me with you. You could have helped me find somewhere to live. You could have at least warned me what was coming. I set down my fork and looked at him directly. But you didn't do any of those things because it would have been inconvenient for you. That's not fair. You don't know what it was like for me, watching the family fall apart. You're right. I don't know what it was like for you because you disappeared along with everyone else. But I do know what it was like to be 17 and homeless because the people who were supposed to protect me decided I was disposable. Alex's jaw tightened. I came here to apologize, to try to make things right. I thought you'd understand that people make mistakes when they're under pressure. Oh, I understand pressure, Alex. I understand it better than most people. What I don't understand is why your current pressure should be my problem to solve. Because we're family, he said, his voice rising slightly. Because blood means something. I almost laughed. Blood means something? Where was that philosophy 12 years ago? Karen, please. I know I screwed up, but I can't change the past. I can only try to do better now. My kids are going to lose their home if I can't figure this out. There it was. The manipulation I'd been waiting for. Bringing the children into it, making me responsible for their welfare if I refused to help him. I signaled for the check. Alex, your children losing their home would be tragic, but it wouldn't be because I refused to bail you out. It would be because their father made poor financial decisions and is now trying to manipulate his abandoned sister into solving problems he created. That's cold, Karen. Even for you. Cold? I repeated, pulling out my credit card. You know what's cold, Alex? Leaving a 17-year-old to fend for herself because it's financially convenient? What I'm being is consistent. You taught me that family members aren't responsible for each other's survival. I learned that lesson very well. As I signed the check, Alex made one last attempt. Mom and Dad want to see you too. They miss you. I looked at him for a long moment. Do they? Or do they miss the idea of having a daughter who might be useful to them now? His silence was answer enough. I left him sitting at that table with the check for his own meal, and a clearer understanding of exactly how successful his guilt trip had been. Some lessons, once learned, can't be unlearned. And I'd learned a long time ago that when people show you who they are, you should believe them the first time. 2 weeks after the disastrous dinner with Alex, my mother called my office directly. She must have gotten the number from my company website, because she bypassed my assistant and somehow reached my personal line. Karen? The voice was older, more tentative than I remembered, but unmistakably hers. It's Mom. I'd been reviewing contracts when the phone rang. Now I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair, surprised by how calm I felt. Hello, Linda. I used her first name deliberately. She'd forfeited the title of Mom 12 years ago. Oh, honey, it's so good to hear your voice. Alex told me you two had dinner. He said it didn't go very well. That depends on your perspective. I thought it was quite illuminating. There was a pause. Karen, I know you're angry with us. You have every right to be. But I was hoping we could talk, just you and me. There's so much I need to explain. Explain away. I have a few minutes. Not over the phone. Could we meet somewhere? Please? I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for lunch the next day. I chose a restaurant near my office, somewhere I could easily leave if necessary. She was already seated when I arrived, looking smaller and grayer than I'd expected. The woman who had once seemed so formidable now appeared fragile, almost nervous. She stood when she saw me, hesitating as if she wanted to hug me, then sitting back down when I made no move toward her. You look wonderful, she said, her eyes taking in my tailored suit and confident posture. So professional, so successful. I ordered a salad and water, making it clear this wouldn't be a long meal. She fidgeted with her menu, ordering soup she barely touched. Karen, I need you to know that leaving you wasn't easy for us. It was the hardest decision your father and I ever made. Was it? I asked. Because the note you left made it sound pretty straightforward. Her face crumpled slightly. That note, I rewrote it so many times. I didn't know how to explain something that I didn't fully understand myself. Try now. You've had 12 years to figure out how to explain abandoning your minor child. She took a shaky breath. We were drowning, Karen. Your father had been out of work for almost a year. We'd maxed out every credit card, borrowed against the house twice. The bank was starting foreclosure proceedings. I waited, letting her continue. We couldn't afford to feed 3 people anymore. We could barely afford 2. When your father finally got that job offer in Phoenix, it was for housing, but just a 1-bedroom company apartment. We couldn't take you with us, even if we'd wanted to. Even if you'd wanted to, I repeated. She flinched. That came out wrong. Of course we wanted to take you. But you were almost 18. You had a job. You were so capable. We thought... You thought what, exactly? We thought you'd figure it out. You were always the smartest one, the most resourceful. Even as a little girl, you solved problems the rest of us couldn't. I set down my fork, processing her words. So you abandoned me because I was competent? We didn't abandon you. We made an impossible choice. We couldn't take care of all 3 of us, so we tried to save who we could. And you decided I was expendable. No! She leaned forward, her eyes filling with tears. We decided you were strong enough to survive. And we were right, weren't we? Look at what you've accomplished. The rationalization was breathtaking in its selfishness. They'd convinced themselves that abandoning me was somehow a gift, that forcing me into homelessness had been an act of faith in my abilities, rather than a betrayal of their responsibilities. Linda, let me ask you something. and I want a completely honest answer. If I had failed, if I'd ended up dead or addicted or in prison, would you have felt responsible? She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. We told ourselves you'd be fine. We had to believe that, or we couldn't have done it. That's not what I asked. I asked if you would have felt responsible if I hadn't survived. Her silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, we would have. But Karen, we didn't have any good choices. We had $3,000 to our name and a week to get out of the house before the sheriff came to evict us. Your father's new job paid just enough to keep us alive, not to support 3 people. We were choosing which one of us would suffer, and we chose ourselves. I stared at her, processing this admission. You chose yourselves. At least that's honest. We chose to keep the family together, minus one person who we believed could survive on her own. The family, I repeated slowly. You mean you, Dad, and Alex? I wasn't part of the family you were trying to keep together. That's not... She stopped herself, realizing that was exactly what she'd said. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You had enough money to relocate 3 people, but not enough to support 3 people. So instead of all of you struggling together, you decided that I should struggle alone while the 3 of you stayed comfortable. It wasn't comfortable, Karen. That apartment was tiny and your father's hours were terrible. But you had a roof, and food, and each other. She nodded, tears flowing freely now. And in 12 years, not one of you thought to check if I was alive. Not a phone call, not a letter, not even a Google search to see if I'd ended up in jail or dead. We were afraid, she admitted. Afraid you'd hate us. Afraid of what we might find. So you chose ignorance over responsibility. We chose to believe you were okay because the alternative was unbearable. I leaned back in my chair, studying this woman who had given birth to me but had never truly been my mother. The tears, the guilt, the justifications, none of it changed the fundamental math of what they'd done. Linda, can I tell you what really happened after you left? She nodded, bracing herself. I lived in a storage unit for 6 months. I showered in gas station bathrooms and ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, because that's all I could afford. I worked night shifts at a diner while finishing high school, and I studied by battery-powered lantern light because I couldn't afford electricity. Her face went white. Karen, I had no idea. You had no idea because you chose not to know. You weren't concerned with the reality of my situation, only with maintaining your fantasy that abandoning me had been a difficult but necessary choice. You thought wrong. But here's the thing, Linda. You were also right about one thing. I did figure it out. I survived and I thrived, and I built something extraordinary, but not because of your faith in my abilities. I succeeded in spite of your betrayal. I stood to leave, but she grabbed my wrist. Karen, please, we need you. Your father's health is failing, we're drowning in medical bills, and I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. And now you need me. How convenient. We're family, she said desperately. No, Linda. We're biologically related. Family is something else entirely. Family doesn't abandon each other when times get hard. Family doesn't disappear for 12 years and reappear only when they need something. I gently removed her hand from my arm. You made your choice 12 years ago. You chose to save yourselves and sacrifice me. Now I'm making my choice. I choose to save myself and let you handle your own problems. As I walked away from that table, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, but a profound sense of closure. The woman crying behind me was a stranger who happened to share my DNA. The people who had raised me, taught me, shaped me into who I became, were the night shift workers at the diner, the teachers who stayed late to help, the strangers who had shown me small kindnesses when I needed them most. My real family was the one I'd built myself, one relationship at a time, with people who chose to love me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The smear campaign began 2 weeks after my lunch with Linda. It started subtly. A former high school classmate mentioned that she'd heard I'd had some troubles as a teenager and had run away from home. Then my business partner David forwarded me a screenshot of a Facebook post from someone claiming to be my former neighbor, saying they remembered when I'd stolen money from my parents and disappeared. By the end of the month, the narrative had crystallized into something grotesque but believable. I was an ungrateful daughter who had robbed her struggling family and run away, leaving my poor parents heartbroken and financially devastated. The story painted them as victims of their own child's selfishness and criminality. The private investigator I'd used before proved invaluable in tracking the source of these rumors. It was Alex, working in coordination with my parents, systematically contacting anyone they could find from my past to spread this fabricated version of events. They were crafting a story that served multiple purposes. It explained my 12-year absence in a way that made them sympathetic figures. It preemptively discredited any version of events I might share. And it positioned them as the wronged parties, making any refusal to help them look like continued cruelty from their victimizer. The most insidious part was how reasonable their story sounded to people who didn't know the truth. Troubled teenager steals from family and runs away? It happened every day. Successful adult who won't help her struggling parents? That looked like selfishness, especially when the parents were elderly and facing medical bills. I was in my office when my assistant brought me a particularly nasty email from a potential client who had heard some disturbing things about my character and was withdrawing their business. That's when I realized this wasn't just personal vindictiveness. It was an attack on my professional reputation. That evening, I called a meeting with my legal team. I laid out the situation clearly. My biological family was conducting a deliberate campaign to destroy my reputation because I'd refused to give them money. Do we have grounds for defamation suits? I asked my attorney, Rachel. Potentially, but it would be difficult to prove damages, and it might generate more publicity than you want, she replied. The real question is what you want to achieve. Do you want them to stop? Or do you want to clear your name publicly? Both. Then we need evidence, documentation, proof of what really happened 12 years ago. That's when I realized I'd kept everything. The note my parents left, photos of the storage unit I'd lived in, pay stubs from the diner, school records showing my address changes. I'd saved it all, not out of sentimentality, but because I'd learned early that documentation was protection. More importantly, I had witnesses. Maria from the diner was still alive and remembered me clearly. My high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, had kept detailed notes about students in crisis. The community center where I'd showered had security footage archives that might still exist. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. My brother Alex had been posting on social media about his financial struggles for months, creating a clear timeline that contradicted their victim narrative. His own Facebook posts showed him asking for money from various relatives, mentioning his parents' financial problems, and bragging about reaching out to his successful sister long before he'd actually contacted me. I compiled everything into a comprehensive file and had my attorney send cease and desist letters to Alex and my parents. The message was clear: stop spreading lies, or face legal consequences with evidence that would expose them completely. But I also did something else. I started telling my real story to people who mattered. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly, to the colleagues and clients who had heard the rumors. I shared the documentation with a few key people, letting them draw their own conclusions. The truth, I discovered, was more powerful than fiction. When people saw the actual note my parents had left, the photos of where I'd lived, the timeline of events supported by documentation, the lies fell apart. More importantly, my professional reputation spoke for itself. 12 years of ethical business practices, reliable service, and genuine relationships carried more weight than gossip from people no one had ever met. Within a month, the Whisper campaign had backfired spectacularly. Instead of destroying my credibility, it had highlighted my resilience. Instead of making me look like a selfish daughter, it made me look like someone who had overcome extraordinary circumstances to build something meaningful. The final irony was that their lies had inadvertently advertised my success story. Several new clients approached me specifically because they'd heard I'd built my business from nothing and wanted to work with someone who understood real struggle. As I sat in my office looking at the stack of new contracts, I realized that my family had given me one final gift. They'd taught me that my reputation was strong enough to survive their worst intentions. They'd tested my foundations and found them solid. They'd also revealed something crucial about themselves. When decent people can't get what they want through honest means, they accept disappointment and move on. When toxic people can't get what they want through manipulation, they escalate to destruction. The people who had abandoned me at 17 were now trying to destroy me at 29. The consistency was almost admirable. The escalation came exactly as I'd predicted. When the cease and desist letters stopped the social media campaign, and when it became clear that their reputation destruction had backfired, my family moved to direct confrontation. It started with Alex showing up at my office building. My security called to inform me that someone claiming to be my brother was in the lobby, demanding to see me. When I refused the meeting, he began shouting loud enough for other tenants to hear, claiming I was heartless and abandoning family in their time of need. Security escorted him out, but he returned the next day, and the day after that. By the fourth day, he'd brought reinforcements. My mother stood in the lobby holding a photograph of me as a child, telling anyone who would listen that her daughter had turned her back on the family that raised her. They'd stationed themselves during lunch hour when foot traffic was highest, maximizing the number of people who witnessed their performance. When building security banned them from the property, they moved to the parking garage. When they were banned from there, they set up across the street with handmade signs reading, "Karen Mitchell, successful businesswoman, failed daughter." The harassment extended beyond my workplace. They somehow got my home address and began parking outside my house at all hours. Sometimes just sitting in their car, sometimes walking up to ring the doorbell repeatedly when I was clearly home but not answering. My neighbors, professional people who valued privacy and quiet, were not amused by the disturbance. Mrs. Chen from next door approached me apologetically to say that the situation was making her uncomfortable. And could I please handle it? The final straw came on a Friday evening. I was hosting a small dinner party for potential investors when my parents showed up at my front door, demanding to be let in. They rang the doorbell continuously for 10 minutes, then began pounding on the door and shouting, "Karen, we know you're in there. We can see the cars. How can you entertain strangers while your own parents are suffering?" My guests, sophisticated business people who were considering investing significant money in my firm, sat in my dining room listening to this spectacle. One of them, a venture capitalist named James, quietly asked if I needed to call the police. I excused myself and opened the front door, stepping outside to face my parents on the porch. They looked haggard and desperate, but their eyes held something I recognized from my childhood. The particular rage that came when they weren't getting their way. "This ends now," I said quietly. "You're harassing me at work, at home, and now you're disrupting my business meetings. This is stalking, and it's going to stop." "We're not stalking you," my father said, his voice shaking with anger. "We're trying to reach our daughter who won't return our calls or acknowledge our existence." "I acknowledged your existence. I met with Alex. I met with Linda. I heard what you had to say, and I made my decision. That should have been the end of it." "The end of it?" My mother's voice rose to near hysteria. "You're our child. You don't get to just cut us off because it's convenient." "Watch me," I replied calmly. That's when my father stepped closer, his face flushed with rage. "You ungrateful little bitch. We gave you life. We raised you. And this is how you repay us? You gave me DNA and 18 years of housing. That's not the same thing as raising me. And you seem to have forgotten that you threw away any claim to gratitude when you abandoned me. We didn't abandon you. We made a hard choice in impossible circumstances. You keep telling yourself that. But we both know the truth. You saved yourselves and sacrificed me, and you'd do it again tomorrow if it served your interests." My mother began crying. Loud, theatrical sobs designed to attract attention from the neighbors. "How can you be so cruel? We're old, we're sick, we're struggling, and our own daughter won't even help us." "Your daughter is helping you," I said. "She's teaching you the same lesson you taught her, that when people won't or can't help you, you figure it out yourself." That's when my father made his mistake. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to bruise, and pulled me toward him. "You're going to help us, Karen. One way or another, you're going to do right by your family." Behind me, I heard chairs scraping as my dinner guests stood up. James appeared in the doorway, followed by the other investors. "Is everything all right out here?" James asked, his tone making it clear that everything was obviously not all right. My father immediately released my arm and stepped back, realizing he'd just physically threatened me in front of witnesses. Professional witnesses. Wealthy, influential witnesses who could destroy what little remained of their credibility. "Everything's fine," I said, not taking my eyes off my father. My biological relatives were just leaving. The word biological hung in the air like a slap. Not family, not parents. Biological relatives. "Karen, please," my mother whispered. "We're desperate." "I know," I replied. "Desperate people do desperate things, which is why I'll be filing for a restraining order on Monday morning. If you come within 500 feet of me, my home, or my business again, you'll be arrested." As they walked back to their car, I heard my father mutter something about lawyers being expensive and teaching me a lesson I won't forget. I turned to my dinner guests, who were standing in my doorway looking shocked and uncomfortable. "I apologize for that display," I said calmly. "As you may have gathered, I have some family members who are having difficulty accepting boundaries. Shall we return to dinner?" The restraining order should have ended it. Judge Morrison listened to my testimony. reviewed the evidence of harassment, and issued a comprehensive order prohibiting my parents and brother from contacting me directly or indirectly, from coming within 500 feet of my home or business, and from posting about me on social media. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, the judge said sternly, your daughter is under no legal or moral obligation to provide you with financial support. This court will not tolerate further harassment. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and jail time. I thought that would be sufficient. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the restraining order was issued, my parents were arrested for violating it. They'd been caught on security cameras placing flyers under windshields in my office building's parking garage. The flyers contained my photo and personal information, along with accusations that I was a heartless daughter who abandoned her elderly parents. They spent one night in jail before making bail, and I assumed the reality of legal consequences would finally penetrate their desperation. Again, I was wrong. The violations escalated. They created fake social media accounts to circumvent the prohibition on posting about me. They had Alex's ex-wife call my office pretending to be a potential client, then launch into a tirade about my family abandonment when my assistant connected the call. They hired a billboard company to put up a sign on the highway leading to my office complex reading, Karen Mitchell, when success costs your soul. Each violation resulted in fines, court appearances, and eventually brief jail sentences. But they seemed to view legal consequences as merely the cost of doing business in their campaign to force me into compliance. The breaking point came when they involved my employees. My assistant Jennifer had worked for me for 3 years. She was professional, discreet, and fiercely loyal to both me and the business. When she didn't show up for work on a Tuesday morning, I called her cell phone repeatedly with no answer. Finally, she texted me, Karen, I'm so sorry, but I can't come in today. There are people outside my apartment who say they're your parents, and they've been there since 6 a.m. They're scaring my children. I immediately called the police and my attorney, then drove to Jennifer's apartment complex myself. I found my parents sitting in lawn chairs they'd brought from home, positioned directly outside Jennifer's first-floor unit, where her 2 young children could see them through the window. They'd somehow obtained Jennifer's home address, probably through public records tied to her employment verification, and decided that harassing my employees was an acceptable escalation. When I pulled up, they didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. Maybe now you'll talk to us, my father said, standing up from his lawn chair. You're harassing my employee at her home in front of her children. We're trying to get your attention, my mother replied. Since you won't respond to reasonable attempts at communication. Reasonable? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think terrorizing innocent people who work for me is reasonable? We think doing whatever it takes to reach our daughter is reasonable, my father said. That's when I realized something fundamental about these people. They genuinely believed that their need justified any behavior, no matter how harmful to others. In their minds, I was the villain for not giving them money, and anyone connected to me was fair game in their war to change my mind. When the police arrived, my parents were arrested again, this time for stalking and harassment of a third party. The charges were more serious and bail was set higher, but the damage was done. Jennifer was visibly shaken. Her children were asking questions she couldn't answer, and she felt unsafe in her own home. She requested a transfer to work remotely for the indefinite future, which I immediately approved along with a security system for her apartment paid for by the company. That evening, I sat in my attorney's office discussing options that went beyond restraining orders. Rachel, they're not responding to legal consequences. They're treating jail time and fines as acceptable costs. What are my options for making this stop permanently? Civil harassment suits, extended restraining orders, possibly criminal charges if we can prove a pattern of stalking, she replied. But Karen, I have to ask, what do you think they'll do if they realize they can't win? What do you mean? Desperate people with nothing left to lose sometimes make dangerous choices. They've already shown they're willing to involve innocent parties like your employee. If they conclude that legal pressure won't work, they might escalate to something more serious. I thought about my father's grip on my arm that night at my house, the rage in his eyes when I refused to comply. I thought about the calculated way they'd researched Jennifer's address and terrorized her children to get to me. You think they might become physically dangerous? I think people who believe they're justified in any behavior to get what they want are inherently unpredictable. And people facing financial ruin with no other options sometimes make desperate choices. That night, I upgraded my home security system, informed my office building's management about the ongoing situation, and arranged for a security consultant to review my daily routines. I was learning that setting boundaries with truly toxic people doesn't make them respect those boundaries. It makes them more creative about violating them. And when creativity fails, some people turn to force. My parents had taught me many lessons over the years, but this was perhaps the most important. That some people would rather destroy what they can't control than accept that it's not theirs to control. The final confrontation happened at my office, but this time I orchestrated it. After months of escalating harassment, arrests, and violations, I realized that my parents would never stop on their own. They'd convinced themselves that persistence would eventually wear me down, that their desperation gave them the right to terrorize me and anyone connected to me. So I decided to end it myself. I had my attorney arrange a meeting under controlled conditions. My office conference room, my security, my recording equipment, and my rules. I told them through their court-appointed lawyer that I would meet with them one final time to discuss their requests, but only under these specific circumstances. They agreed immediately, probably thinking they'd finally broken me down. When they arrived, they looked worse than I'd ever seen them. Months of legal battles, fines, and brief jail stays had taken their toll. My father's face was gaunt, and my mother's hands shook slightly as she sat down across from me. Alex looked defeated, older than his years. "Thank you for agreeing to see us," my mother began, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and desperation. "Don't thank me yet," I replied. "You might not like what I have to say." For the next hour, they laid out their case. Their medical bills, their mortgage payments, their credit card debt, their shrinking Social Security checks. They painted a picture of elderly people facing destitution through no fault of their own. When they finished, I looked at each of them carefully. "I want you to understand something," I said finally. "I feel nothing for you. Not anger, not hatred, not love, not pity. Nothing. You are 3 people who share some of my DNA, and that's the extent of our relationship." "Karen, we're your family," Alex protested. "No, you're not. You stopped being my family the day you abandoned me. Everything that's happened since then has just confirmed what I learned that day. You are people who will sacrifice others to save yourselves. We made mistakes," my father said, "but we're trying to make amends." "You're not trying to make amends. You're trying to extract money from someone you perceive as wealthy. If I were still living in poverty, would you be here asking for forgiveness? Would you care about our relationship if I couldn't write you a check?" The silence answered my question. "I know about Alex's second divorce, about his gambling debts. I know about your reverse mortgage and your credit card company's threatening lawsuits. I know exactly how much money you need and why you need it." They looked stunned that I'd researched their situations so thoroughly. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to leave this office and you're never going to contact me again. You're not going to call, email, text, write letters, or send messages through third parties. You're not going to show up at my home or office. You're not going to harass my employees or post about me online. And if we don't," my father asked, some of his old defiance returning, "then I'll destroy you." The words hung in the air like a threat, which is exactly what they were. "You think this has been difficult for you so far? You think some fines and overnight jail stays were hard? I have resources you can't imagine. I have attorneys, investigators, connections, and most importantly, I have patience. I can make your lives infinitely more complicated than they already are." I leaned forward slightly. "But more than that, I simply don't care what happens to you. You taught me not to care when I was 17. That lesson took root and it's never going away. Whether you live comfortably or die in poverty is completely irrelevant to me." "You can't mean that," my mother whispered. "I absolutely mean it. You want to know the difference between us? You need me. I don't need you. You can't hurt me anymore because I don't care about you anymore. But I can hurt you, and I will if you continue to disrupt my life." I stood up, indicating the meeting was over. "This is the last time we'll ever speak. When you leave here today, I want you to forget you ever had a daughter, because I've already forgotten I ever had parents." As they filed out of my office, looking broken and defeated, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not victory, but a profound sense of completion. The scared 17-year-old girl who had found that note was finally, completely gone. In her place was someone who understood that indifference is the ultimate power over people who have hurt you. When you stop caring what they think, what they need, or what they do, they lose all ability to manipulate or control you. I had become untouchable to them, not because I was angry or vengeful, but because they had made themselves irrelevant to my life. And that indifference, more than any punishment or revenge, was the thing they couldn't fight or overcome. 5 years have passed since that final meeting, and I can tell you with complete certainty that my biological relatives kept their word. I never heard from them again. I know this not because they found peace or acceptance, but because about 2 years later, my private investigator informed me that my father had suffered a stroke and was in a nursing home. My mother was working at a grocery store to pay for his care, and Alex had filed for bankruptcy and moved back in with them. I felt nothing when I received this information, not satisfaction, not sadness, not guilt, nothing. But let me tell you what happened to the people who actually mattered. Maria from the diner retired and moved to Florida, but we still exchange Christmas cards every year. She was the first person I called when my business was featured in Forbes, and she cried with pride when I told her how well things had turned out. When she needed surgery last year that her insurance wouldn't fully cover, I quietly paid the difference. That's what family does. Big Jim passed away 3 years ago, but not before seeing me speak at a conference for small business owners. He sat in the front row and introduced himself to everyone around him as Karen's old friend from the diner. His funeral was standing room only, filled with people whose lives he'd touched with his kindness and wisdom. Jennifer, my assistant who was harassed by my parents, became my business partner when we expanded into consulting services. She's brilliant, loyal, and raises her children with the same fierce protectiveness that helped her survive that difficult period. Her kids call me Aunt Karen and don't know that their college funds are already fully funded. Mrs. Patterson, my high school guidance counselor, nominated me for an Alumni Achievement Award. When I went back to accept it, she pulled me aside and said, "I always knew you'd be fine, Karen. You had something the other kids didn't. You understood that your circumstances didn't define your possibilities." David, my business partner, became one of the closest friends I've ever had. He knows my whole story and has never once suggested I should forgive my parents or heal the rift in my family. He understands that some relationships are meant to end, and that wisdom lies in knowing the difference between what can be repaired and what should be discarded. I've built a chosen family of people who earned their place in my life through consistency, kindness, and genuine care. We celebrate each other's successes, support each other through difficulties, and show up when we're needed. This is what family actually looks like. My company now employs over 100 people and has helped launch more than 1,000 small businesses. I speak at conferences about entrepreneurship, resilience, and building success from nothing. I never mention my personal story publicly, but I do share one crucial message: that your value is not determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you treat yourself. The most important lesson I learned from those years of conflict with my biological relatives is this: forgiveness is not mandatory. Reconciliation is not necessary for healing, and family is not defined by blood. Some people are born into loving families who support them through everything. Others, like me, have to create their families from the people who choose to love us despite having no obligation to do so. The people who abandoned me taught me that I was disposable to them. The people who stayed taught me that I was valuable to them. I chose to believe the ones who stayed. Today, I woke up in a home filled with photos of people who matter to me: friends, colleagues, mentors who helped shape who I became. I'll spend this evening having dinner with people who chose to be in my life and whom I chose in return. This is what victory looks like. Not revenge against those who hurt you, but a life so full of genuine love and meaningful relationships that their absence becomes irrelevant. I am living proof that you don't owe anyone your forgiveness, your presence, or your resources simply because they share your DNA. You don't owe anyone a relationship that diminishes your peace, threatens your safety, or demands that you set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from people who will never value you and toward people who already do. Sometimes the greatest family you'll ever have is the one you build yourself, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one boundary at a time. And sometimes the best thing toxic people can do for you is exactly what mine did for me. They can teach you that you're strong enough to survive without them, capable enough to thrive despite them, and wise enough to know the difference between people who deserve a place in your life and people who don't. My story began with abandonment, but it ends with belonging, real belonging, with people who earned their place and who I earned in return. That 17-year-old girl in the storage unit would be amazed not just by what I built, but by who I built it with, and she would be proud. My friends laughed because I didn't order food, until the bill came and they demanded that I split it. My name is Emma, I'm 24 years old, and I work as an administrative assistant at a digital marketing company. I live alone in a small apartment, and to be honest, my budget is always tight. But I had a group of friends from work, Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda, who always included me in their outings, and I really valued that friendship. The problem is they had a very specific habit that bothered me deeply, but I never had the courage to confront. Whenever we went out together, the three of them would order the most expensive drinks at the bar, the most elaborate appetizers, the most sophisticated dishes. And then, when it came time to pay, there was always that story of, let's split everything equally among us. For months, I swallowed hard and paid. I paid for Sarah's $15 martinis while I drank water. I paid for Jessica's $18 gourmet appetizers while I ate free peanuts from the counter. I paid for Amanda's $45 main courses while I just watched and made up excuses about being on a diet. They knew about my financial situation. They knew I earned less than a fifth of what they earned. They knew I lived alone and had bills to pay. But still, every Friday, it was the same dynamic. They spent like there was no tomorrow, and I paid the bill as if it were my obligation to maintain group harmony. But last Friday, at the Olive and Anchor, something inside me broke. It was a happy hour after work, as always. We got there around 6 in the evening. The bar was packed, ambient music, that vibe of the weekend beginning. Sarah was radiant because she had closed a big client. Jessica had just returned from a trip to Miami. Amanda was celebrating a promotion. They sat down and immediately started browsing the menu like they knew every item by heart. "The grilled salmon with truffle risotto is divine here," Amanda murmured. "And that midnight in Paris cocktail is a unique experience," Sarah added. I opened my menu and my stomach contracted. The main dishes cost between $40 and $60. The specialty cocktails between $15 and $25. A complete meal there would easily pass $80 with tip. "Girls," I said, trying to sound casual, "I think today I'll just drink something. I'm not very hungry." That's when the laughter started. "Wow, Emma, you always say that," said Jessica, giggling. "When was the last time you ate something when we went out?" Sarah joined the teasing. "It's true. You're the most disciplined person I know, always resisting temptations." Amanda completed, "That must be why you're always in shape. I'm so envious of your willpower." They laughed as if it were the funniest thing in the world. As if my discipline were a choice, not a financial necessity. As if I resisted food out of willpower, not because I couldn't afford to pay. The waiter approached to take orders. Sarah was first. "I'll have the sea bass with wasabi puree and the Sunset Boulevard cocktail." $52 just for her. Jessica ordered the lamb with herb crust and a glass of imported Portuguese wine. Another $48. Amanda chose the lobster with champagne sauce and an artisanal Negroni. Another $55. When it was my turn, they all looked at me expectantly, still with that little smile of someone who was having fun with my eccentricity. "Just sparkling water," I said, closing the menu. The silence was instant and embarrassing. The waiter seemed confused. "Are you sure? Not even an appetizer? Maybe some nachos?" "I'm sure, thank you." That's when the real jokes started. "Guys, Emma is taking this diet very seriously," said Sarah, feigning concern. "Could she be overdoing it?" "Yeah, honey," Jessica agreed. "You can eat something small. It won't hurt." Amanda was more direct. "Or could it be a money issue? Because if it is, we can—" "No," I interrupted too quickly, feeling my cheeks burn. "It's not that. I'm just not hungry." They exchanged looks that I couldn't interpret at the time. Now I know they were looks from people who were planning something. Throughout the entire meal, they made sure to highlight how delicious the food was. "Emma, are you sure you don't want to try? This sea bass is divine. Wow, this lamb is perfectly cooked. You're missing out. This champagne sauce is a unique experience." Each comment was a disguised jab. Each compliment about the food was a way to remind me of what I was missing by my own choice. They were having fun with my situation, and I was finally starting to realize it. When they finished eating, Sarah ordered dessert. "The Belgian chocolate cake with vanilla ice cream is unmissable," she said, already waving to the waiter. Jessica and Amanda immediately agreed. Another $15 each. I drank my sparkling water and forced smiles while they savored their expensive desserts. I calculated mentally. Each of them had already spent more than $70. I had spent $3. That's when the bill arrived. Sarah grabbed the check, looked quickly, and announced naturally, $218. Should we split it 4 ways? That's $54.50 each. My heart stopped. $54.50 for my $3 sparkling water. "Wait," I said, my voice coming out louder than intended. "I only had water. It doesn't make sense for me to pay $54.50. The mood at the table changed instantly. The giggles stopped. The smiles disappeared. Jessica was the first to speak. "Emma, we always split the bill equally. It's easier that way." "But I didn't eat anything," I protested. "You knew I was only going to drink water." Sarah sighed, as if I was being difficult. "It's a matter of practicality. And besides, You were here with us. Enjoyed the atmosphere, the company. Enjoyed the atmosphere? I repeated incredulously. You want me to pay $54.50 for enjoying the atmosphere? Amanda tried to be diplomatic. Look, Emma, we understand your situation, but when you go out in a group, it's normal to split the costs. It's a matter of social etiquette. Social etiquette. As if I were rude for not wanting to pay for food I didn't eat. Girls, I said, trying to stay calm, I can pay my fair share. $3 for the water plus proportional tip. That's about $4. The silence that followed was loaded with tension. Other people at nearby tables started looking in our direction. Sarah put her card back in her purse, visibly irritated. You know what, Emma? This is very embarrassing. We've always split everything, and it was never a problem. It was never a problem because I always paid quietly, I replied, feeling a courage I didn't know I had. But this time I'm not paying for your dishes. Jessica shook her head disapprovingly. What an unpleasant situation. Now we'll have to explain to the waiter. Split the bill. It was incredible. They were making me feel guilty for not wanting to pay $50 for $3 water. I was the villain for establishing a basic boundary. You can explain to the waiter, I said, getting up and grabbing my purse. I'm not paying for your food. Never again. I left $4 on the table, more than enough to cover my water with a generous tip, and left the restaurant with trembling legs, but my head held high. Behind me, I heard Sarah calling the waiter. Sorry, but we're going to need to split the bill. I got home and collapsed on the couch, still processing what had happened. For months I had been the idiot who paid for others without questioning. For months they laughed at my discipline, knowing exactly why I didn't eat. They knew I didn't have money and found it funny. They knew I struggled to pay their share and didn't care. Worse, they had fun with it. But as painful as it was to admit, I had allowed it. I had accepted this dynamic for months because I didn't want to lose my friends, because I thought it was better to be exploited than to be alone. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision. Never again. Never again would I pay for others out of fear of confrontation. Never again would I accept being treated like a doormat because of money. I had no idea that this decision would change everything, and that things were just beginning. The confrontation begins. On Monday, I arrived at the office prepared for some kind of tension. Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda were in the break room having coffee, talking quietly among themselves. When they saw me, the conversation stopped abruptly. Good morning, girls, I greeted normally. Good morning, they replied in chorus. But the atmosphere was strange, cold. Throughout the morning, I noticed sideways glances, whispers that stopped when I approached. At lunchtime, they left together without inviting me, something that had never happened before. It was Carla from HR who told me what was going on. Emma, she said, approaching my desk at the end of the afternoon. Can I talk to you for a minute? We went to the empty meeting room. Carla closed the door and sat across from me with a worried expression. Look, I don't know if I should tell you this, but the girls are spreading that you caused a scene at the restaurant on Friday, that you refused to pay your share of the bill and left them in an embarrassing situation. My blood boiled. They said that? Sarah was in the kitchen telling a bunch of people that you all went to dinner together, and when it came time to split the bill, you made a drama because you didn't want to pay. According to her, you always accept invitations but then make trouble when it's time to pay. I was shaking with rage. They had completely distorted the story. In their version, I was the freeloader, the one who caused problems over money. Carla, can I tell you what really happened? She nodded, and I told her everything. How they always ordered the most expensive things, knowing my financial situation. How I always ended up paying for others. How on Friday I finally established a limit by refusing to pay $54.50 for $3 water. Wow, said Carla when I finished. That changes everything. They really made it seem like you were the problematic one in the story. And now everyone in the office must be thinking I'm stingy and difficult. Carla sighed. Some colleagues did comment. But now that I know your version, I can talk to some people, clarify things discreetly. I thanked Carla, but I knew the damage was already done. Their narrative had spread first, and it was always harder to correct a distorted story than to tell the truth from the beginning. During the rest of the week, I felt the environment changing around me. Some people treated me with subtle coldness. Others avoided talking about money or plans to go out when I was around. Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda acted as if nothing had happened, but no longer included me in conversations about outings or events. That's when I received an unexpected invitation. On Thursday, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I took a while to recognize. It was from Brenda, a colleague from finance who I rarely talk to beyond basic greetings. Hi, Emma. A group of us is going to have a happy hour on Friday at Rusty Anchor. Nothing too fancy, just to relax after the week. Wanna come? I hesitated. After everything that had happened, the idea of going out with work colleagues made me anxious. But at the same time, I didn't want to isolate myself completely. Who's going to be there? I asked. Me, Marcus from IT, Anna from accounting, John from marketing, and 2 or 3 other people, chill people. Rusty Anchor was a much simpler bar than Olive and Anchor. Affordable beers, homemade snacks, casual atmosphere, nothing like the sophisticated places that Sarah and her group frequented. Okay, I'll go. What time? New friends, new perspectives. On Friday after work, I went to Rusty Anchor with cautious expectations. The place was exactly as I imagined. Small, cozy, with classic rock music playing softly and decoration that wasn't trying to impress anyone. Brenda was already there with the group. Marcus, a guy in his 30s with a scruffy beard and a very relaxed personality. Anna, a 40-year-old woman, mother of 2 children, always friendly, but whom I had never had a chance to get to know better. John, a guy my age who had recently joined the company. Emma, so good that you came, said Brenda, giving me a genuine hug. We sat at a round table and Marcus immediately asked, "What are you all going to have?" The first round is on me. First round on someone else. What a revolutionary concept. I ordered a canned beer, nothing sophisticated. Anna ordered a draft beer. John wanted a simple gin and tonic. Nobody was trying to impress anyone with expensive orders. The conversation flowed naturally. We talked about work, but also about movies, music, trips we'd like to take. Marcus told hilarious stories about the IT problems he solved. Anna talked about the craziness of raising 2 teenagers. John shared his adventures as a recent graduate trying to understand adult life. And for the first time in months, I felt relaxed going out with work colleagues. When it came time to order another round, John offered to pay. Then Anna insisted on paying for the third. There was no drama, no astronomical bill, no unfair division. More importantly, nobody teased me for ordering just beer. Nobody commented on my discipline or made jokes about willpower. They simply accepted me as part of the group. It was when Brenda brought up the subject I was avoiding. "Emma," she said during a pause in the conversation, "can I say something? I know it's none of my business, but I heard some comments at the office about that situation at the restaurant last week." My stomach contracted. Marcus, Anna, and John looked at me with genuine interest. Not malicious. "What situation?" asked Marcus. I sighed. "I went out with some colleagues last Friday and there was drama when it came time to split the bill." "What kind of drama?" Anna wanted to know. I hesitated, but something about their welcoming manner encouraged me to tell the truth. I related the whole story. The months paying for others, the teasing about my discipline, the demand to pay $50 for water, my refusal, and the distorted narrative that spread afterward. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. "Man," said Marcus, "that's messed up. They really made you pay for the others for months? And on top of that, they spread that you were the problematic one?" John added, indignant. Anna shook her head. "That's exploitation. And I thought it was just in my head." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I've gone out with them a few times," Anna explained. "I always thought there was something strange. They always ordered the most expensive dishes, and there was always that pressure to split everything equally. I stopped accepting invitations because it was getting heavy for my budget." "Me too," said Brenda. "I went once and spent almost $100 in one night. Never wanted to repeat that." Marcus laughed humorlessly. "They tried to invite me a couple of times, but I always made excuses. I had a strange feeling about it." John agreed. "Yeah, I noticed that there are people in the office who kind of avoid going out with them. Now I understand why." I wasn't alone. Other people had noticed the toxic pattern of Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda. Other people had distanced themselves because of it. "You know what irritates me most?" said Anna. "They earn much more than most of us and still make others pay for their luxuries." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "If they want to eat at expensive restaurants, they should pay out of their own pocket, not exploit colleagues." "You did the right thing, Emma," said Brenda firmly. "You had to establish boundaries." For the first time since Friday, I felt validated. My reaction hadn't been exaggerated. My boundary hadn't been unfair. I had done the right thing. We stayed later than planned, talking and laughing. When it came time to leave, the total bill was less than $40 for 5 people. We split it equally, $8 each. And there was still enough left for a generous tip. $8. A whole night of genuine fun for $8. The war escalates. Throughout the following week, our new friendship solidified. Marcus created a WhatsApp group called Rusty Crew, and we started planning more casual outings. A coffee after work here, a snack there, hallway conversations that naturally extended. It was incredible how different it was to have friendships without financial pressure. When we went out, everyone ordered what they wanted and could pay for. If someone was tight one month, the others understood and adjusted plans. If someone wanted to spend more, they paid their own bill without involving others. But things with Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda were far from over. On Wednesday, I received a message from Sarah on WhatsApp. "Hi, Emma. We're going to have a barbecue at my sister's house on Saturday. It'll be very casual. Everyone brings something. How about it?" I stared at the message in disbelief. After a week of total coldness, after spreading lies about me, now they wanted to include me again? "Hi, Sarah. Who else is going?" I replied, curious to understand the game. "Oh, the usual group. About 15 people. We thought of you to bring the drinks. You have good taste for these things." The drinks. For 15 people. At a Saturday-long barbecue. I did quick calculations in my head. At least $200 in beer, soda, water, and ice. Maybe $300 if I wanted to guarantee enough variety. It was obvious what was happening. They had given me the most expensive responsibility of the event, probably after laughing among themselves about how I had saved money at dinner. But this time, I knew exactly how to play their game. "Sure, I'd love to help with the drinks. I'll take care of everything," I replied with fake enthusiasm. Sarah must have been surprised by my positive reaction because she took a while to respond. "That's great. The party is at 2 in the afternoon. I'll send you the address." I spent the rest of the week planning. I researched promotions at 3 different markets. I found a clearance on sodas close to expiration, still good for consumption, but with 70% discount. I got beer on sale in an end-of-lot promotion. I bought water in 5-liter jugs, much cheaper than individual bottles. In total, I spent $52, much less than they expected, and all known brands. Nothing that could be criticized. Saturday arrived, and I loaded my car with enough drinks for a small army. My sister's house was beautiful, a modern-style construction with a large backyard, pool, and complete gourmet area. "Wow, Emma, you really went all out," said Amanda when she saw me unloading the drinks. There was something in her tone that I couldn't identify. Sarah appeared wearing a summer dress that cost more than my weekly income. "Such efficiency. Look at the variety you brought." Jessica approached to help organize everything on a side table. Very well thought out, separating by type. It looks super organized. The barbecue was really good. People brought elaborate salads, gourmet sides, artisanal desserts. My contribution of drinks seemed almost basic next to so much sophistication, but it was fulfilling its role. Everyone was drinking, laughing, enjoying the sun. I talked to some people I didn't know, took photos, participated in activities. On the outside, everything seemed normal, but around 4 in the afternoon, I went to get my purse that I had forgotten in the car, and when I came back through the kitchen, I heard voices coming from the laundry room. It was Sarah talking quietly with 2 other people. She really showed up after all that scene at the restaurant, and she still brought the cheapest drinks she could find. My blood froze. I stopped behind the door, heart racing. A female voice I recognized as Sarah's cousin responded, "Don't you think you're being a little hard on her?" Jessica joined the conversation. "Hard? She caused the biggest fuss last Friday, left us in a super embarrassing situation. And today just proves that she can't keep up with our level," continued Sarah. "Look at the brands she brought. Everything as cheap as possible." Amanda entered the conversation. "It's not our fault if she can't afford it. But if she accepts to participate, she has to take on the responsibilities." Sarah's cousin seemed uncomfortable. "But you know she earns much less." "So what?" Jessica cut in. "Everyone has their priorities. If she prioritized participating in events instead of I don't know what, she could manage." "Exactly," agreed Sarah. "It's a matter of choice. We choose to invest in our social life. She chooses to make drama. Choice. As if I chose to earn less. As if I chose to struggle. The funny thing is that she still came after all the scandals she made," continued Amanda. "Some people really have no sense." I went back to the backyard with my mind boiling. They were all there, laughing, drinking my drinks, pretending normalcy. Sarah waved when she saw me. "Hey, Emma, I was missing you. Come here, we were talking about next week's projects." I forced a smile and joined the group. Throughout the afternoon, I observed every interaction with new eyes. Every seemingly innocent comment now had a second layer of meaning. "The drinks are great, Emma," said Jessica, raising a beer can. You always make good choices. Was it a compliment or veiled sarcasm about my promotion research? When the barbecue was ending, I helped collect things, trying to keep up appearances until I could leave. Thanks for all the help, Emma, said Amanda when I was saying goodbye. You're a sweetheart. In the car, driving home, I replayed the conversation I heard dozens of times in my head. Every word, every tone, every justification they made. They genuinely believed they were right, that I was the problem, that I made bad choices and then created drama. To them, I was the clueless person who didn't know my place. The perfect opportunity Monday arrived, and I went to work with completely different energy. No longer the anxiety of wanting to please or the insecurity of being judged. I knew exactly where I stood now. During breakfast, Jessica approached my desk with that fake smile I now recognized perfectly. Hey, Emma, the barbecue on Saturday was really nice, right? Amanda was commenting on how helpful you were with everything. It was great. Jess, thanks for including me, I replied naturally. We were thinking about organizing a surprise birthday party for Sarah in 2 weeks. Would you be up for helping with the organization? There it was. The next test, the next game. Sure, it would be an honor. What did you have in mind? Jessica smiled with that expression I now knew was predatory. We were thinking about Azure, that new sophisticated restaurant downtown. Reservation for 12 people. You could be responsible for the decoration and cake? Azure. I knew it by name. A high-end restaurant where dishes cost between $80 and $120. And they wanted me to fund decoration and cake for 12 people. Easily $300 or more. How awesome! When is it again? I asked, maintaining enthusiasm. Saturday in 2 weeks. I know it's tight, but we trust your good taste. Good taste. As if my financial situation were a matter of choice and not reality. Let me organize my schedule and confirm with you today, okay? As soon as Jessica walked away, I started planning. Not what they expected, me spending money I didn't have to impress them, but my own strategy. Actually, I had been organizing small events as a hobby for some years. Birthday parties for family friends, simple celebrations. I had some supplier contacts and knew how to make things look beautiful without spending much. I spent 2 weeks planning meticulously. I got decorations rented for a fair price, negotiated a beautiful but economical cake with a small bakery I knew. Total, $240. Expensive for me, but doable if I put it on the credit card. And more importantly, I had a plan they would never expect. Jessica, I called when I saw her in the hallway. I confirmed. I can take care of the decoration and cake. She seemed genuinely surprised. Really? That's incredible. Sarah is going to be emotional. I have some ideas that will make everything beautiful, I replied. And I really did. During the 2 weeks, I pretended to be super excited. I sent messages in the group asking about Sarah's preferences, talking about the surprises I was preparing, showing myself completely involved. Sarah was radiant. Girls, I can't even sleep from anxiety. It's going to be the most special birthday of my life. Amanda agreed. For sure. Our organizer is killing it. Our organizer. As if I were their employee. On Friday, I finalized all preparations. The decoration was really beautiful. Gold and pink tones, elegant centerpieces, metallic balloons. The cake was a work of art. 2 tiers, chocolate frosting, sugar flowers. Saturday morning, I arrived at Azure 2 hours early to set everything up. The restaurant was even more impressive inside than in the photos. Crystal chandeliers, noble wood furniture, panoramic city view. The manager helped me organize the reserved table. It looks spectacular, he said when we finished. Your friend is going to be emotional. The guests started arriving at 7. Sarah entered radiant, wearing a dress that cost more than 3 weeks of my income. My God, it's perfect, she exclaimed with tears in her eyes, hugging me tight. Everyone complimented the decoration. The photos were magazine-worthy. The cake was an absolute success. I had exceeded all expectations. When the waiter brought the menus, Sarah announced generously, "Girls, today is a party. Order whatever you want." She didn't say who would pay, but from the way she spoke, it seemed like it would be her. I only ordered a Caesar salad as an appetizer and sparkling water. I'm still on that diet, I explained when Sarah asked why I wasn't ordering more. But don't worry, I'm super happy celebrating with you. Throughout the entire dinner, I was the life of the party. I made emotional toasts, started animated conversations, took hundreds of photos of the birthday girl. I was radiant, participative, being the best friend they could want. The cake arrived with lit candles. Sarah blew them out emotionally. Everyone sang happy birthday and applauded. It was a perfect moment, exactly as she had dreamed. Then the bill came. $1,500 for 12 people. Sarah grabbed the check, and to my surprise, her expression completely changed. She had clearly forgotten how much a party at Azure would cost. "Let's split it among everyone," she announced, trying to maintain composure. "That's $125 each." That's when I played my decisive card. "Girls," I said, getting up from the chair, "it was a magical night, but I need to leave now. I have an early commitment tomorrow." I grabbed my purse and started saying goodbye. "Sarah, happy birthday." "I hope it was everything you dreamed of." Sarah seemed confused. "But what about the bill?" "Oh, I only had salad and water. I left $20 on the table. Covers my part with a generous tip. My real contribution was already the decoration and cake I organized and paid for. Thank you for letting me be part of this." And I left the restaurant with a radiant smile, leaving behind a sepulchral silence. I knew exactly what was happening in there. They had planned to make me pay more than $100 for a dinner I barely touched, after I had already spent $240 organizing the entire party. But this time, I was smarter. The war intensifies in the car, my phone exploded. Sarah, Jessica, Amanda, all calling at the same time. I let them all go to voicemail. The messages started polite. "Emma, where did you go? Come back here." Then became desperate. "You can't leave like that, we have to split the bill." And finally became aggressive. "How rude. You organized the party. You have an obligation to stay until the end." I only replied to one message. "Girls, I organized and paid for all the decoration and cake. My contribution was already more than enough. I hope you enjoyed the party." Jessica's response came immediately. "This isn't fair. You knew how it worked." "I did know," I replied. "That's why I made clear from the beginning what my part would be." Sarah's response surprised me with its fury. "You humiliated us in front of everyone. What kind of friend does that?" "The kind who doesn't accept being exploited anymore," I replied. Amanda tried a more conciliatory tone. "Emma, we always split everything. That's how it works among friends." "No," I replied. "That's how you exploited those who earn less. Now it's over." The messages stopped for a few hours. Then Sarah sent one last one. "You're going to regret this." Monday at the office was a declaration of war. They arrived visibly furious. During coffee, I heard Jessica telling other colleagues. It was a public humiliation on Saturday. We organized a birthday party, and when it came time to pay, one person simply abandoned the group and left everyone paying for her. This time, they didn't just distort the story, they completely inverted it. "Wow, how horrible," said Marina. "What kind of person does that?" "Exactly," agreed Jessica. "We trusted her to organize, she agreed to participate, and at the H hour simply fled from responsibility." I was passing with my coffee when I heard this. I stopped and turned to the group. "Wow, what a terrible story," I said, approaching. "What party are you talking about?" Jessica was visibly uncomfortable, but maintained the lie. "A party we organized on Saturday. One person committed and then left us hanging." "Interesting," I replied calmly. "I also organized a party on Saturday. I spent $240 of my own money on decoration and cake, set everything up alone, made the event beautiful, and then paid my individual bill, $20 for salad and water. What a coincidence." The silence was embarrassing. Marina and the other colleagues looked from Jessica to me, clearly confused. Imagine if, after organizing and paying for all that, they still wanted me to pay another $120 for a salad. I continued laughing, as if the absurdity were obvious. It would be like I was obligated to pay for others' food just because I organized the event. How crazy, right? Marina nodded. "Wow, that would be unfair. If you already organized everything..." Jessica tried to defend herself. "But when you participate in a group, there's an implicit agreement." "Implicit agreement?" I repeated. "Like, if I organize a party and pay for decoration, I'm obligated to pay for others' food too? What kind of agreement is that?" The other colleagues seemed increasingly on my side. Jessica realized she was losing and walked away, irritated. But that was just the beginning. Throughout that week, Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda intensified the campaign against me. They spread increasingly distorted versions of the story. According to them, I was a freeloader, irresponsible, someone who accepted responsibilities and then ran from them. "Emma has always been weird about money," I heard Amanda commenting in the break room. "She accepts invitations but then makes a fuss when it's time to pay." "It's a behavioral pattern," agreed Sarah. "We tried to include her out of pity, but it got to a point where it wasn't possible anymore." Out of pity. as if they were charitable, including me in their groups. Some people in the office started treating me coldly. Others avoided talking about money when I was around. The environment became heavy, but I wasn't alone. Marcus, Brenda, Anna, and John, my new group of friends, were indignant when they learned about the new version of the story. "They're spreading that you organized a party and then refused to pay?" asked Marcus, incredulous. "When you had already paid for the organization?" "It's impressively dishonest," said Brenda, distorting facts like that. Anna shook her head. "They really think they can rewrite reality." It was John who suggested, "You know what you should do? Show the receipts for decoration and cake. Then everyone sees how much you spent." It was a good idea. I had kept all the receipts. On Thursday, when I heard Sarah telling a particularly distorted version of the story in the break room, where I was a freeloader who organized a cheap party and then refused to pay the bill, I decided to act. "Sarah," I said, approaching with a folder in hand, "are you talking about your birthday party?" She tensed. I was explaining to Carla how some people have no responsibility. "Good thing you brought that up," I said, opening the folder. I brought the receipts to show everyone how much it cost to organize. I spread the receipts on the break room table. Rented decoration, $85, personalized cake, $120, flowers and candles, $35. Total, $240. "Wow," said Carla, looking at the receipts. "You spent all that?" "Of course," I replied. It was Sarah's birthday. I wanted it to be special. Sarah was visibly uncomfortable. "Emma, that's not the point." "How is it not?" I asked innocently. "You were explaining about responsibility. I thought it was important to show that I took my responsibility, organized and paid for all this. And then I still paid my own bill at the restaurant." Carla calculated quickly. "So you spent $240 on the party and still paid for your food?" "Exactly. $20 for salad and water. Total of $260, concluded Carla. "And even so, they wanted you to pay another $125? Sarah tried to explain herself. "It's that when you participate in a group." But she had already participated. Carla cut in. With $260, more than double what any other person spent. The math was simple and irrefutable. Sarah left the break room unable to defend herself. The truth comes to light. The story of the receipts spread quickly through the office. People began to understand that I wasn't the freeloader in the story. It was the opposite. "Wow, Emma spent more than $250 and they still wanted her to pay more?" I heard someone commenting. "That's a lot of nerve," another person replied. Their narrative began to crumble, but they didn't give up. On Friday, Jessica tried a different approach. She came to talk to me at the end of work. "Emma, I think there was a misunderstanding about this whole situation." "What misunderstanding?" I asked. "The issue isn't money," she said. "It's about loyalty to the group, about not abandoning friends in a difficult situation." "Difficult situation?" "When you left the restaurant, we were left in an embarrassing situation. We had to explain to the waiter, reorganize the bill." "Jessica," I said calmly, "I organized the entire party, spent $240 out of my pocket, and still paid my own bill. How is that abandonment?" "But you left before the end," she insisted. "That's not done." It was incredible. She genuinely believed I had an obligation to stay and pay for others' food. "What if I had stayed and refused to pay the $125s?" I asked. "That would be different. At least you would have stayed to talk. To have you pressure me until I gave in?" Jessica hesitated. "To resolve things civilly." "Civilly? Like you're doing now, spreading lies about me." "They're not lies," she defended herself. "It's our perspective of the facts." Perspective. That's how they justified the distortions. "Jessica, can I ask you something? Do you really think it was fair for me to pay $125 after already spending $240? She thought for a moment. "When you accept to participate in an event, you accept the responsibilities that come with it. Even spending more than any other person? It's a matter of principle," she said, as if that explained everything. Principle. For them, the principle was that I should pay for others, regardless of how much I had already contributed. "I understand," I said. "Thank you for clarifying." Jessica seemed hopeful. "So can we resolve this?" "Resolve what?" "Go back to being friends. Forget all this confusion." "There's nothing to resolve, Jessica. You made clear you think it's normal to exploit me financially. I made clear I don't accept that anymore." "It's not exploitation," she protested. "It's how groups of friends work." "No," I replied. "It's how you think they should work." She sighed, frustrated. "You're being very difficult." "I'm being fair to myself." Jessica walked away. clearly irritated. Later, I heard her commenting to Amanda, "Emma is impossible. She doesn't even want to talk about resolving things." For them, resolving meant me going back to accepting being exploited. The unexpected success. But while they continued trying to bring me down, something interesting was happening. Several people in the office had seen the photos of Sarah's birthday party on Instagram. The decoration had really been impressive. "Emma," said Marina, approaching me on Monday, "I saw the photos of the party you organized. It was beautiful." "Thank you. Do you do this professionally?" "No. It was just a favor for a colleague. Because I was looking for someone to organize my sister's wedding. Would you be interested?" My heart raced. A wedding. That would be a real opportunity. "Sure, I'd love to talk about it." Marina gave me her sister's contact, and we scheduled a meeting for the end of the week. During the week, 2 more people approached me. The director's secretary wanted someone to organize a corporate party. A colleague from finance was planning a quinceañera for her daughter. I was discovering I had real talent for this, and more importantly, I was discovering a way to earn extra money doing something I enjoyed. On Thursday, Carla from HR called me for a conversation. "Emma, we're organizing the company's year-end party. Would you help us?" It would be official freelance work, of course paid. My heart raced even more. An official opportunity, recognizing my talent. "Sure, I'd love to." Everyone was impressed with that birthday party. Even Sarah herself couldn't stop praising your work to management. Interesting. The Sarah who was furious with me was praising my work to the company. "It's for 200 people, so it's a big project. We'll schedule a meeting to discuss details." 200 people. A project that could yield significant money and open doors to other jobs. Leaving the meeting, I passed by Sarah's desk. She looked up from the computer, and for the first time in weeks, there was no hostility in her gaze. There was something I couldn't identify. "Hi," she said quietly. "I heard you're going to organize the company party." "Yeah, looks like it." "It's quite an opportunity," she said, and there was a note of respect in her voice. "I'm excited," I replied. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say something more, but just nodded and went back to work. The turnaround. The year-end party was an absolute success. I received compliments from all levels of the company and $2,000 for the work. More importantly, I got 8 contacts from other companies interested in my services. Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda were at the party, trying to act normally, but the dynamic had changed forever. I was no longer the needy one they could exploit. During the party, several people approached me praising my work. "You have natural talent. Have you thought about starting your own company? Give me your contact." Around 10 o'clock, Amanda approached. "Congratulations on the party, it's incredible." "Thank you, Amanda." "We were thinking—" She hesitated. "How about we talk? Just the 4 of us. To clarify things." "What kind of clarification?" "Resolve our problems. Go back to being friends." I stared at her for a moment. "Amanda, do you really think I should have paid $125 that night? After already spending $240? She became uncomfortable. "It's complicated." "No," I said. "It's simple. Do you think yes or no? When you go out in a group, there's an understanding. Answer yes or no," I insisted. Amanda sighed. "We always split everything." "That doesn't answer my question." She looked around, as if seeking support, and finally said, "Maybe. Maybe it was a little unfair." "A little?" "Okay, it was unfair," she admitted reluctantly. "But you also overreacted." "How did I overreact?" "Leaving like that? Causing embarrassment?" It was incredible. Even admitting they had been unfair, they still thought I had overreacted. "Amanda, you exploited me for months. When I finally established a boundary, you spread lies about me. And you think I overreacted?" "They weren't lies," she defended. "It was our interpretation." "Interpretation? You said I refused to pay after organizing a cheap party. I spent $240. Where's the interpretation there?" Amanda looked down. "Maybe we expressed ourselves poorly." "You didn't express yourselves poorly. You deliberately lied." "Emma, please, we can get over this." "Why should I want to get over it?" "Because we were friends." "No," I said calmly. "You were predators and I was the prey. Now that I found my place, you want to go back to the old dynamic. It's not that. It's exactly that, Amanda. You're only approaching because you saw I don't need you anymore. Actually, I'm doing better without you." And it was true. My life had improved in every aspect since I distanced myself from them. Amanda tried once more. "We can change." "No," I replied. "You can change? But that doesn't interest me anymore. I found people who truly respect me." She walked away, visibly frustrated. The new beginning 6 months later, I was in my own office. Luna Events. Inspired by Luna Cafe, where I sometimes met with my real friends to plan. My colleague's sister's wedding was an absolute success. The photos circulated on social media, generating a flood of clients. I had found my calling. Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda continued at the company. Our paths occasionally crossed in the hallways. The relationship was cordial, but distant. They greeted me politely, sometimes even complimented my work. But there was always an underlying tension. They never fully admitted they were wrong. In their view, there were misunderstandings and overreactions on both sides. They continued believing their way of splitting bills was normal and fair. A year later, I received a message from Amanda on LinkedIn. "I saw your company is growing a lot. Congratulations. You always had talent for these things." I replied politely, "Thank you, Amanda. I hope you're doing well too." But I didn't feel like resuming contact. Some bridges once burned don't need to be rebuilt. During a meeting with a new client, she commented, "You seem very confident for someone so young." I smiled, remembering how it all started. I learned that establishing boundaries is the foundation of any healthy relationship, personal or professional. And how did you learn that? Through a restaurant bill I refused to pay unfairly. She laughed, thinking I was joking. But it was true. That night at Olive and Anchor had completely changed my life. Today, when I go out with my real friends, people who respect me regardless of my budget, we sometimes tell this story and laugh. Marcus always says, "You turn their meanness into your financial independence." And he's right. They thought they were humiliating me, putting me in my place. Actually, they forced me to discover my true worth. It seems ironic, but it was the best favor anyone ever did me, even if it wasn't intentional. Establishing boundaries, even when uncomfortable, is essential to maintain self-esteem and find genuine relationships. And sometimes, the people who try to diminish us end up being the catalyst for our greatest transformation. Today I know, my worth isn't measured by what I can pay, but by what I no longer accept tolerating, and that's priceless.